Assalamualaikum and a very good morning. Today we are doing lecture number 10, which is Neoplasia. The title is very short, but actually the lecture is basically it's about neo is the word for new, right? And plasia is, as we mentioned earlier in previous lectures, it means growth. So neoplasia literally means new growth. Or in layman terms, we talk about cancer. Now, cancer is such a huge field because it is fast becoming one of the most common cause of death, especially in the developed countries. You know, they don't have typical cause of death like in less developed country, for example, like infection or pneumonia and things like that. So cancer is a fast growing cause of death, and not only that, it also has a lot of morbidity. That means it impacts the patient in other ways as well, not just in health. And it also affects the carers, the family members that have to manage the patient. So this is a very important lecture, and you need to focus a lot because it's quite a lot of new concept for you guys. So today's objective should be able to elaborate on the background of neoplasia or cancer, define its nomenclature. So this is nomenclature, means it's the naming of the cancer. So how do we decide what type of cancer you want to say? So how do you name the cancer? You need to understand the nomenclature, list out and elaborate the characteristics of benign and malignant neoplasm. So there's benign, which is not evil, okay, and malignant, which is the evil new growth, okay. What is its epidemiology, its etiology? How do we as hosts defend ourselves against this new growth? What are the clinical aspects of neoplasia? And how do you diagnose it using laboratory? Okay, so new growth, as I mentioned, literally means that new growth. It's the second cause of death in a developed country with a very high morbidity, as I mentioned, because it has a lot of side effects. Especially important is pain. A lot of people who have new growth are in pain, and the carers need to learn how to manage the pain in this type of patients. Okay, so, but the clinical meaning of neoplasia or new growth is abnormal mass of tissue. So you see the highlighted one. So it's an abnormal mass. Normal mass, we do not call it new growth. So it's an abnormal mass of tissue of which the growth exceed and is uncoordinated. That means the growth is over what is supposed to be a normal parameter, and it's not coordinated. That means if the tissue next to it is growing at rate of 1 to 1, the abnormal mass of tissue or the neoplasia maybe is going at a rate of 5 to 1. So it's not coordinated. And it persists even after the cessation of stimuli. So in the first place, why does it grow? Because there's something that stimulates it to grow. Unfortunately for this new mass or new growth, even after you remove the stimuli or the cause of why it actually starts to grow, the growth still continues. Okay, and that is an issue and a problem when we want to treat this neoplasia. Now, the other thing about neoplasia is it's a bit like virus. You know, as you know, we are all stuck at home because of COVID. Now, COVID is a type of virus, right? So virus only lives in the host. Once it's outside of the host, after a few hours it dies. That's the reason why we are told to keep washing our hands, right? To clean it off from the virus. Now, the same thing with neoplasia, it depends on the host. That means it can only grow in a host. For nutrition and blood supply, if there's no host, it's not in a living cell, it will not grow or not become bigger and bigger. Okay, so we are actually, or the patient is actually feeding the new growth with their nutrition and blood supply. So it's like a catch-22. You want the patient to be strong, so you tell them to eat good food and all that, but sometimes it also feeds the cancer by the nutrition and the blood supply. Okay. Now, oncology, I'm sure some of you guys have heard of the term. This is the study of new growth, but in clinical terms, in hospital, it tends to mean more towards malignant growth, or what we know as cancer, right? The evil type of growth. So there are oncologists in most major hospitals, right? In fact, the head of the oncology of Malaysia is a good friend of mine. She's my classmate from medical school. So she's the head of the oncology oncology department, I suppose, in the whole of Malaysia. So unfortunately, we don't have many oncologists in the government sector because most of them will leave to work in the private sector as the work hours are much better, plus the financial remuneration is like maybe 10 times bigger than staying in a government sector. So there's not a lot of oncologists left in the government sector, and it's also not an easy specialty to pass. So for the new generation, sometimes they have to take 2 or 3 times before they actually pass their masters to become an oncologist. So it's not easy, especially with study of cancer. Everything is going very fast because everybody's doing research on cancer. Before the COVID issue, everybody's doing research on cancer. So there's a lot of new data coming in every day, and you have to keep track of all this to treat your patient, and it's not always easy or viable. Now, as mentioned earlier, it's divided, this new growth or neoplasm is divided into benign, which is the not evil. I wouldn't say it's good, but it's not evil, benign, or the malignant, the evil kind, or what we know as frank cancer, right? Obvious cancer. Now, there's 2 basic components to this neoplasm. One is the parenchyma, or the cells itself, the neoplastic cells itself, but there's also the supporting host derived, which is not neoplastic. It's not part of the new growth, but it is supporting the new growth with connective tissue, with blood vessel, with inflammatory cells, all this to provide food for the new growth to keep on continue growing. So you need both components for a new growth to actually sustain itself. Okay, so this is usually how we attack then. We try to treat the patient by attacking either directly at the neoplastic cells or at the supporting tissue. So benign and malignant, this is the nomenclature or how you name these neoplasms. So benign, or the not evil one, usually ends with an oma at the end, while the malignant one tends to end with a sarcoma or a carcinoma. Sometimes if it's a mixed tumor, you don't put sarcoma or carcinoma, it just there's a name for it. So this is a table that you can see, right? Fibroma, connective tissue, fibroma, these are fibrous tissue. So if it's a benign growth, you call it fibroma, while if it's malignant, you call it fibrosarcoma. Now for fat tissues, it's called lipoma if it's benign, but if it's malignant, then you call it liposarcoma. Chondroma, that is for cartilage. So if it's benign, you call chondroma. Again, if it's malignant, then you just convert it to chondrosarcoma. While for bone, right, you call it osteoma. And if it's malignant, you call it osteogenic sarcoma. But a lot of bone cancers, they have their own name, like Ewing sarcoma, because these are named after the physicians or the researchers that found the type of bone cancer. Now, what about in endothelial? You can see if blood vessel, you call it hemangioma if it's benign, but if it's malignant, it's called angiosarcoma. If it's lymph, lymphangioma, and if it's malignant, lymphangiosarcoma. Okay. What about in the blood cell related cells? There rarely are benign growth. So if you see abnormal cell counts, it tends to be malignant, which are the leukemias and lymphomas. I'm sure everyone has heard of leukemia. It tends to happen in either young children at extreme of ages, either very young children or older generation, right? The older generation tend to get chronic type of leukemia, while the younger generation tends to get acute type.